So, Díomh is Misha Eoin, agus is an ordum bheith anseo inniuh. So, my name is Eoin, and it's an honour for me to be here to talk to you today. A language is like a person. It has siblings, it has cousins, it has ancestors. It comes from a certain place and it lives in a certain place. When it meets new people, it gets to know them and it learns from them, but it imparts a lot of its wisdom to those people as well. And it can have a vibrant life and it can die like people do. So today we're going to talk about language biographies. And we all know the biography of English. He came with the Anglo-Saxons from Germany into Roman Britain and took up camp there. And then after a while, the Normans came up from France and they laid a level of French on top of his English. So he had words like answer already from German, Antwort. But then he got other words from French like réponse, which became response. So he then had two levels that he could use. He used his Germanic sort of substrate and then the French that the Normans brought as well. Then, I mean, it's a good job that English absorbed the French it did, because if it hadn't, it wouldn't have survived. But because it has this ability to absorb, it survived. And then under the British Empire, it flourished, came to America, and then through the internet and through popular culture, it's become the lingua franca of the world. So we're familiar with English's biography, but we're probably not so familiar with his very attractive, but not so well-known neighbour, Irish. So today we're going to stalk the life out of Irish's Facebook profile. And we're going to go through her life events to see what's happened in her history, where she comes from, who she's related to, where she's been in her life, and maybe where she's going as well. So we'll start. Let me just see if there's anything else to say about that. There'll be text on these slides, but you don't need to see the text because everything I will say, everything you see I will say. But I've put up the text so that at the end of this presentation, when you've got to know Irish a little bit better, you might want to add her as a friend. And then you can go back and look through the history and learn from the Facebook profile later on. We'll be a bit rushed for time because 2,500 years is a long time to get through in an hour. So I would be happy if you could keep your questions till the end, but I'd be glad to answer any question you have or try at the end. So we're going to go right back to the start of Irish's life, and we're going to see where she's from, who's her family. So this, hard to see, but it's a family tree of the Indo-European languages. So Irish is a Celtic language and it belongs to the Indo-European branch. So the Indo-European tree starts here, it branches into Indo-Uranian, that gives us then Bengali, Hindi, Urdu. And then the European branches off to give us Germanic languages like German, Dutch and English, which are like brother languages maybe. Spanish, Portuguese, Italian and French that are like siblings as well. Russian, Ukrainian and Polish in the Slavic branch. And then one of the other branches is Celtic. And there's a little family of Celtic languages there, and Irish is one of them. So if we look in a little bit closer again, we'll see exactly what that family looks like. So we have the Indo-European branch, the great-grandparent, giving us Proto-Celtic, which was like an early form of Celtic. And it's split then into two branches of family. So there was the Q-Celtic, of which Irish is a part, that has lots of K sounds in it. So for example, the word for sun in Irish, does anybody know? My students? Sun? Mock, M-A-C, Mac, mock. So it's in lots of Irish names, McEvoy, my own name. It was originally a patronym, so my father would have been Eoin, for example, if we said it like that. So these are all Q-Celtic languages, and their cousins are P-Celtic languages. Welsh, spoken in Wales, Breton, spoken in Brittany in the north of France, and Cornish, spoken in the southwest of England. These are P-Celtic languages. They have lots of P and B. So if Mock is the Irish for sun, what's the Welsh, the Old Welsh for sun? Map, which became Mab. It's Mab today. And that's in lots of their names as well. So this is where we find Irish in this family of languages. But if Irish came from the same place that Bengali came from, for example, that must mean that it wasn't always where it is now. So do we have an idea where it sprang from? Who brought it over? You'd kick yourselves. The Celts. So, the Celts brought the language with them from Central Europe. All of those languages they brought into Britain and into Ireland. And the date is disputed about when Irish moved to Ireland, but they place it somewhere around 500 to 300 BC, so about 500 years before Christ. Some people say it was a lot earlier, or that there were sort of trade links before the Celts actually came over, but it's not sure. Most people agree around this time. So the Celts brought the language with them. They intermarried, or they squashed the people who were there already. We don't know much about those people. So they're the ones who built, say, Stonehenge in Britain or Newgrange in Ireland, these huge megalithic tombs. We don't know what language they spoke, we don't know much about them, but they married in with the Celtic people that came, and then the Celtic language that became Irish took hold in Ireland. After a long time then, Irish started to feel the influence of a second language, and that language was Latin. So let me just zoom into this a little bit. So, in the early Christian era, so in 6th century, 5th century, 6th century, lots of Christians moved into Ireland and they set up Christian monasteries in Ireland. Who was the first one? No, wrong, I knew you'd say it. So St. Patrick wasn't actually the first one. It was a guy called Palladius, and he came in 432 AD in some sources. Patrick came a little bit later. He was Welsh, in fact. I don't know if you knew that. He wasn't Irish, he was Welsh. But he was sent as a missionary to Ireland, like lots of people were at the time. They set up Christian monasteries where learning flourished. So they copied manuscripts, they made beautiful metalwork, and they learned Latin as well, and the manuscripts they were copying were Latin. And through them, Latin came into Irish. And it's important to notice as well that when this happened, the rest of Europe was going through its dark ages, what we sort of call the dark ages, which is maybe not the most accurate term for it anyway, but learning flourished at that time. We had our kind of renaissance at that point in Irish history. So we learned Latin from these monks. They came into the language. So I don't know if you can see this down the back, but I'll read them out. So we borrowed the words for God, church, book, and priest, perhaps not surprisingly, because that's what the monks were about. So I'll get you to say them after me. The Latin for God is Deus, and the Irish is Dia. And we still see that in deity, divine, those words in English, they come from a similar Latin root. Then we have the word for church, the organization of the church in Latin, ecclesia, which became Aglish over hundreds of years. That's why it sounds a bit different, but it's very clearly rooted in that word. And we still have the English ecclesiastic that has that same root. A book is in Irish leabhar, from liber in Latin. My Latin's not great, so the pronunciation might not be okay, but I know that nobody knows how to pronounce Latin anyway, so we should be all right. And then priest was sacerdos in Latin, and we've got sagart now. So these are still our words for these things that, more than 1,000 years later. And Christianity had a very strong hold in Ireland since that time, and then Catholicism after it. So the way we say hello, we use the word God, and we say God to you. That is the most common way to say hello. So we say diaghut. You say it? Diaghut. And then when the person responds to you, they have to prove that they're more religious than you are. So they say Dias Maraghut, God and Mary to you. So why don't you just say it to the person next to you, Diaghut, and they're going to say Dias Maraghut to you. Lovely. Okay. So, because the Christian monks are making these beautiful works of art in the monasteries, it catches somebody else in Europe's eye, the Vikings. And the Vikings come down from Scandinavia and they ruin the place. So they come up the rivers in their longboats, and they just sort of ruin the place, I think is probably the best way to say it. They steal the manuscripts, they steal the chalices that have been made to hold the the wine. But they don't have much of an effect on the language of the country. Some settlements are set up. Dublin is one of them, Waterford in the south and Wexford in the south, among others. They're the main ones. The word Dublin actually means dove, linn, black pool, which is interesting. It means black pool. But they didn't have much of an effect on the language, but they did give us some words. So we'll have a look at those. It was mostly words to do with trade, because that's what the Vikings did, I suppose. So we have knappe, a button, knappe from knapper, and we still have that in the German word is knopf. Maybe some people speak German, and we have the word knob in English from that same root. There's skilling, which was a shilling, and that comes from skillinger in Norse. And then we have pingen, a penny, from penninger. From Norse. So we don't have many words from the Vikings, but we have a few still. We obviously have the euro now, so we don't have shillings or pennies anymore, but we still say knappe for a button. A group that had more of an influence on the language than the Vikings, though, were the Normans. So the Normans are the ones who took French to England in 1066, the Battle of Hastings, and they came then from England as Anglo-Normans now, we call them, and they came into Ireland and brought a sort of mix of French and English in there as well. So they had quite a profound impact on the culture in Ireland. They were most numerous in the south of Ireland, and we still notice the effect they had on the language. So if we have two-syllable words, most of the people in the north pronounce the first syllable. They emphasize it. So my predecessor, for example, his name was Kieran. In the north and in the west of Ireland, people would call him Kieran. In the south, people call him Kieran, and they emphasize the second syllable. And that shift happened because of the Norman influence, because that's the way the French was spoken at the time, even though it's not spoken that way now. So that is a very clear distinction between the Irish in the north half of the country and the south half of the country, and it's because of the Norman influence. We also picked up a few words from them. I hope those are too small for you to see. So I want you to, does anybody speak French? Yeah, okay. So the word chomre, you have any idea where that might have come from? Chomre? Chambre, okay, a room, where we get chamber from in English. Of is a piece of food. Egg, œuf, gave us of. And we still have that, through Latin, we have that sort of like ovulating or sort of that kind of thing, was a similar word there. And then we have garçon, garçon, a boy. So that's a very southern word. We have a different word up in the north. And then koppel, cheval, a horse, where we have like cavalier and that kind of thing from today as well. So they brought French with them, but they actually assimilated very well into the culture. So they became sort of more Irish than the Irish themselves. That's what some historians call them. They learned Irish, they became patrons of the arts in Ireland, and they encouraged poets to develop the language as well. So they were very important in establishing a linguistic standard as well, which was unusual, or a language standard, which was unusual at the time for Europe, that a group would decide we have a language standard and we're going to teach the language in schools. And the schools that the poets studied at were very prestigious places, and the poets that came out of them were very revered figures in Irish society for a long, long time, for many hundreds of years. But we're going to move on slightly to a not so pleasant time in Irish history. So this is what the map looks like around 1450. So the Normans have been here for 300 years. The blue here shows where the Anglo-Norman lords have their sort of base. The green is all still Gaelic chieftains that would have spoken Irish and had Gaelic customs. The red area here is the Pale, where we get the phrase in English beyond the pale from, and that was ruled by the King of England. So it was the only place really that was fully loyal to the king. When the Tudors came to power in England, they weren't so happy with this, that they'd sent their Anglo-Normans over, but that the Anglo-Normans had become more Irish than the Irish themselves. So England had lost its grasp a little bit on Ireland. So the Tudors came and they set about sort of getting Ireland back again. So himself arrived, and Henry VIII, and he dissolved the monasteries. So the monasteries that were set up in the 5th and 6th century that had supported learning from earliest times, he came and he shut them all down. He took the wealth they had and they just disappeared. Some fought back actually for quite a long time, but in general he had a very detrimental impact there. He carried on what his father before him had done of taking land off Irish landowners and only giving it back to them if they dropped their Irish titles and took English titles instead, which some did, which some resisted. And then when he died, his daughter Mary carried on that policy. She planted, we say, Laois Offaly, which is the Midlands of Ireland, right between Dublin and Galway, where I grew up. There's not much there. People normally just drive through it to get to the other side of the country. But she planted that area, which means she took English and Scottish nobility and planted them into those areas so that they would sort of be like representatives of the crown in those areas, and they would keep down the local Irish natives. So she was a Catholic. Her father had obviously split away from the Catholic Church when he couldn't get divorced, but she was a Catholic, and so it wasn't a religious war in her case, but she was still furthering the goals of the monarchy. After her came Elizabeth, and Elizabeth was Protestant, so for her it was also a religious thing. She planted Munster, so that's the South province, so Kerry, Cork, that area. She translated the Bible to Irish in order to convert Protestants or Catholics to Protestantism, and she also set up Trinity College Dublin, which is one of the most prestigious university in the country, still today. She was followed by King James I, who did a similar thing, but in Ulster in the north. And at this point, we're in the 1600s now, and this is when things go terribly wrong for poor Irish, our friend, because the Gaelic system collapses. At the Battle of Kinsale in 1601 down in Cork, the English army flattens the Irish chieftains that have come down from the north, and shortly after that the flight of the Earls happens, in which the Gaelic chieftains who aren't happy to live under English rule just get in their boats and leave to Europe. So some of them marry into royal families in Europe, into Spanish royal families, say. Some of them just disappear and are sort of forgotten in history. But this was sort of a pivotal moment in Irish history, because once they left, there was nobody to stand against English rule in Ireland, and it really took a much firmer grasp on the place then. Because these chieftains had left, there was nobody anymore to be a patron for the arts. So poetry sort of suffered from it, the Irish language standard suffered from it, and Irish began to be seen as a lower class thing, where before it had high prestige because of these poets. So that was a very detrimental time for the Irish language. The next person who came along, Cromwell. So Cromwell is sort of sometimes celebrated in English history. He actually, his group overthrew the monarchy, chopped Charles I's head off. Charles II? Which was it? Charles I. Chopped his head off, declared a republic, so the Commonwealth of England. And so as the leader of that country in 1640s, he came over to Ireland, and he continued actually what the monarchy had been doing before, but was even possibly more brutal about it. In this time, there are huge massacres of Catholics by Protestants and huge massacres of Protestants by Catholics. It's an awful time. It starts already then. So the stuff we know about the Troubles in the 80s in the north has its roots back here as far as this. So Cromwell's famous for his statement that he was going to push the native Irish to hell or to Connacht. So Connacht is this western province here. So what he did was, there was a lot of Irish still all over the country in the 1600s, but what he does is he pushes the native Irish westwards, because the land is poor in the west. And still today, we have the more traditional Gaeltacht areas are here in Donegal in the north of Ireland, we've got Galway here in Connacht and Kerry down in Munster. So these are traditional Gaeltacht areas, and the people who speak Irish are there because Cromwell pushed them over in that early time. So we have, I'm going to skip 200 years now, in which Ireland becomes officially part of the UK in the Act of Union in 1800. So it's governed directly from Westminster. And when we skip forward from 1649, 200 years, where do we land? Yes, on Gortha Mór, the Great Famine. So the Great Famine is the single most destructive thing that happened to the language, I would say, the single event that was most destructive. So you probably know a lot about the famine because I find Irish Americans especially are very aware of that history, possibly even more so than people in Ireland, because often as a result of the famine, Irish families had to leave and become Irish American families. So the famine happened from 1845 to 49. People argue that it possibly could have been avoided if the English government managed the situation better. It's not like the only thing growing on the island was potatoes. There was other foodstuffs being produced, but they were being exported. So the people were dying on the island while good food was being exported. And the people worst affected by the famine were the poorest. And often the Irish speakers were the poorest because they didn't belong to the upper classes. So they couldn't afford this other food that was being produced in the country. They only could afford to have potatoes. And then when the blight affected the potatoes, the blight affected lots of countries in Europe, but it only ruined Ireland because the people were so poor at the time. So they sort of estimates are sort of all over the place, but I think sort of conservative estimate would be that a million people died and 1 million people emigrated, which is a huge amount for a country that's so small. And now people always say that our country has never reached the population we had before the famine, which is true, but there's a lot more factors in that as well because families have been getting smaller since then as well. But it was a huge thing for the Irish language because if Irish speakers died, they were gone. But if Irish speakers emigrated, they stopped learning the language. And that was perhaps more detrimental again. So they didn't raise their children with Irish because they expected that their children would move to America. And what good is Irish to you if you live in America? Because you need to get ahead, you need to have English. So the people in the Gaeltacht areas stopped teaching their children Irish in order to get them ahead. And when that happens in a language, if it's not passed from one generation to the next, it's done, really. So, terrible, terrible thing. But to come back to Ireland, in the late 1800s, there's a cultural revival where people try to sort of pump new life back into the Irish language, into Irish dance, into Irish sport. And while they're doing that, they sort of discover that the best way to do this would be for Ireland to be independent because they can't get sort of full protection for the things they want or full preservation for these things unless Ireland is free from England, because England is not good at protecting these things. So the people who have come together for the cultural revival are also the leaders of the 1916 Rising, which is probably the most important date in the history of the Irish state. It precedes the birth of the state, but it led to the birth of the state. So during the First World War, when England is occupied in Europe, the Irish Republican Brotherhood say this is our chance. So they stage a rebellion in the capital, mainly in the capital. There are some other areas, but the capital is the main area. And as you can see, this is, if anybody's been to Dublin, this is Sackville Street, which is now called O'Connell Street. That's Nelson's pillar there at the back. Anybody who's studied James Joyce, it's the one he drops the plums. She spits the plums out, the parable of the plums. So it was severely damaged, and people, the leaders of the Rising had proclaimed that Ireland would be an independent country. Now most people kind of ignored them, said, who are those lads saying this? But then the English army came back and crushed the rebellion and executed the leaders. And when they executed the leaders became martyrs in the people's eyes, and the tide turned against the English, eventually leading to the War of Independence a few years later. So that's just a picture of some of the leaders of the rising who will be remembering next year, because 2016 is the centenary of 1916. So Ireland as a state isn't even 100 years old, which is interesting to think about. We've been there for a long time, Irish has been there for a long time, but the state is actually not even 100 years old. So the 1916 rising and the execution of the martyrs, the creation of the martyrs through their execution, leads to the creation of the Free State. The Anglo-Irish Treaty ends the War of Independence, and the country is partitioned. So the 6 countries up the north are split from the rest of it. The 26 counties in the bottom are given their independence, but the 6 counties in the north aren't. And this is where the troubles stem from as well, much later on. Well, not so later on, but quite a bit later on. So once partition happens, it precipitates the Civil War, because there are some people saying we want 32 counties to be independent, not 26, and these two sides come head to head and fight it out. The pro-treaty side won, obviously, because the land is still divided. But so that is kind of what it looks like. We've got Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland under the umbrella of the United Kingdom, and then Ireland as the Irish Free State as an independent sovereign state. This is still a matter of concern for some of the people who live in Northern Ireland, and it's still a sort of a sore point. But for the South and for Irish, it was a good thing, because at last they were in an independent country with people at the top who were interested in preserving it and who were interested in a revival of the culture. This was the sort of interest in Irish was confirmed with the issuing of the 1937 Constitution, which changed us from the Irish Free State that we were called to the Republic of Ireland, or Éire, the Irish word. And in that constitution, Irish was recognised as the first official language, while English was recognised as the second official language. That didn't reflect the situation at all. Far more people spoke English at the time than Irish, but it was a sort of a symbolic gesture to put that first and then English second. And because they did that in 1937, it's been much easier for Irish language rights groups to look for things, because they say, look, by the Constitution, Irish is the first language, so we need more protection. Having said that, there have always been problems with the Irish government's attitude to the Irish language. And in the 1960s, inspired by the civil rights movement in America, the people who lived in the Gaeltacht, which is the Irish-speaking region, launched their own civil rights movement and protested that the state that had Irish as its first official language was not providing them services in Irish. And they marched all over the country, and the result of this march was the creation of an Irish language radio station. And this was a really important moment for the Irish language community, because we had 3 separate Gaeltachts, as I showed you, in Donegal in the north, Galway in the west, and Kerry in the south, that had really grown apart. They spoke very different Irishes, and they didn't know each other's Irish because there was no way of communicating then. When they set up the Irish language station, I know a man who was in his maybe 80s now, he said the first time he heard the radio, he thought the people from Ulster were speaking Scots Gaelic, because he didn't know what it was. But it just takes a while for your ear to get used to it. It's like if Americans never heard Irish people speak and then met them, you'd have initial difficulties, but then you'd slowly get to know what we're saying. So that was very important for creating a sort of coherence in the Irish language community. We could people in Connemara could hear news from Ulster, and the people in Ulster could hear news from Munster, and they felt more like a unified group as opposed to 3 separate little communities. So we're in the end of the 60s now. In the 70s, we joined the European Economic Community, which later becomes the EU. Irish isn't recognised as an official language at the time, but it is later on. And then it's important, when we joined the European Economic Community, they sort of put a lot of funding, sorry, that's my Irish coming out there. They make a lot of funding available for like infrastructure projects and different things like that. So that sort of input lets our country grow quite considerably as well. We have a depression in the 80s. I think maybe we had one here as well. Do we have one in the 80s, or was everything okay here in the 80s? No, 70s. Bad? 70s, okay. So maybe it took a while to reach us. In the 80s it's pretty bad. But then in the 90s we start to see a boom. So maybe you'll recognize this guy. That's the Celtic tiger. The Celtic tiger is our word for the economic boom that happened in the 90s and the 2000s. And so the country had more money than it ever did. And it's interesting, at the same time, in the cities, this is the Dublin skyline, in the cities, interest in Irish grows. And the reason for that, I'm not sure what the reason for that is. I'm not sure if it's at last we weren't embarrassed to be Irish, so we could be interested again. We could start to give our babies Irish names, like mine, for example, Eoin, Owen. Lots of friends my age, Maeve, Kieran, Fiachra, Oisín, they all have like Irish names, where a generation behind don't. My father's name is Edward, which is a very English name. So I'm not sure if it's that, or if it's because when there was a boom in the country, lots of immigrants came into Ireland to avail of the sort of good economy. And I'm not sure if it's maybe because we felt they have other languages of their own, our children are now at a disadvantage because they only have one language. Or was it maybe more sinisterly, was it because we wanted to distinguish ourselves from the immigrants? I'm not sure what it is. So it could be any of those things or a combination of them. But during the Celtic Tiger, Irish experienced a kind of a surge in the cities, which is still happening today. And this map shows the areas where Gael scoilne have popped up. So scoil is the Irish word for school. A Gael scoil is an all-Irish school. So it means all of the subjects in the school are taught through Irish. They learn maths through Irish, they learn art through Irish, they learn sport through Irish. And this is the extent of them over the country. They've all popped up in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. So it's covering the whole country. They're mostly in towns. So it's moving from the traditional Gaeltacht areas in the west into the rest of the country through the cities. And this is a positive thing for the language. There's also a change in the language that's being spoken in these Gael scoilne, so it's not a traditional form of a language as they speak out in the Gaeltachts. It's a kind of a mishmash of English and Irish. But we've seen in the history, we have Latin words coming in, we have French words coming in, we have Norse words coming in, we have lots of English words in the language as well. And at the interface between two languages, so where English and Irish meet over their fence in the garden, Irish has also given things to English. So sometimes my students laugh at me because they don't know what I'm saying sometimes. When I say things like, he was giving out to me, he was scolding me, or he was yelling at me or something, and that's straight from Irish. And often we say things like that, we don't even realise that we're speaking Hiberno English. We think that's the way that people in other places talk. There's another structure that's in James Joyce a lot as well. I'm just after doing that, which means I've just done that, and that comes straight from Irish as well. The amount of actual nouns coming into English through Irish is small. Smithereens is one that we have, means like tiny, tiny pieces, from smitherini, and bohereen, a small road. But they're sort of reserved in sort of rural areas of Ireland. In 2007, Irish becomes an official language of the European Union, which is fantastic because it creates jobs in translation and interpreting, which I'm interested in, obviously. I might go along sometime and see what it's like. And it's good for another reason because it elevates Irish to a similar status as other major European languages on the continent, so French, German, Spanish. It's not quite at the same level as those languages. Not everything is translated still, but its recognition as an official language is a huge step towards reaching the same place. And these kind of things are important in shifting from this old idea that Irish means famine, Irish means death, Irish means immigration, old people speak Irish, and that it's nothing to do with anything new or sort of innovative, any of that kind of thing. And these kind of steps bring it to a new audience and sort of freshen it for us. 2008 was not so good here, and it was even worse at home. So when the economic collapse happened here, or the recession happened here, we have a phrase in Irish, hit an tone as. So we say the ass fell out of the economy. And that's how we say something fell apart. So that's what happened in Ireland. And it fell very hard, and it was very, very hard for a lot of people on the ground. The government then had to cut back on a lot of things in all areas of Irish life, and they had to cut back on the Irish language spending as well. the result of that is protests. And I want to just show you, this was the kind of call to arms, almost, not to arms, but the call to get people to come out on the streets. I hope you'll be able to read the subtitles from where you are, but you can just watch the pictures and listen to the music otherwise. The words are important. But they organised a movement, a campaign called Jarag le Farrig, red with anger. And thousands of people came out on the streets to protest that the Irish government wasn't doing enough to protect the Irish language. A similar thing that was happening in 1969 in the civil rights movement in the Gaeltacht. So I marched in it as well, and there were, I think, it's hard to judge the size of a crowd when you were there, but I'd say there were at least 1 billion people there. There were lots and lots of people there. People were surprised, the media was surprised that so many people came out in support of the language. But this was the call for us to come out. And I would just pause it for a second to say it's propaganda, obviously, but a lot of the facts in it are still true.
We did a photo here as well.
For the day, great.
Is Ian Gaeilge an phríomhthanga a labhraíoch in Éireann I bheadh ní míle bliain, agus is í an teanga scríofa is sinne dá bhfuil againn in iarthar na hórapa. Teanga í a thug an táin, an íneocht, an ruairiocht, na cuinte, na hauráin, an riordanach ó Cain, Vacantaí, Rosenstock, Hector, Hughie, is seo lingdúing. Teanga a bhí níon ar nananacha, is ar ná dananacha. Teanga a mún líach a going fan a nílte blian, is teanga a bhún líon sin. A ségi le seachté teanga ar dain, agus meastar go méid an chuid is mó acu sin bása bhí ceann céad blian. An le an Gaeilge na measc na teanga sin a hasig an fód, so méid sin na fád na leabhar amháin amach an seo. The aon agin na leabharí an Gaeilge, tá chuid mhórling ar cathach a dunaling mar gur Gael sin. Right againn dúrachlainn gur bochtáin sin as ní a leabhart. Right eile gur amar ceappa gur amar níos fearr mar gur leabharí amarí. Dúrach le right againn gur teanga bharr a bhaintí. Bhíine eile gabhach sin mar gur Gael sin. Bhíine eile fós ceileh ceart chun oideachais lán Gaeilge sa Gaeltacht doring. Rinneadh iarracht ar sprid a bhise, cathach mascathaling, ballach seirbhísí wein mar gur Gael sin. Cén tír eile ar dain in nearfaí go the druch féasach as the hanga féin a leabhart. Cén tír eile ar dain a gceilfaí ceart ar chóir an leisir go bhfuil go léiríonn tú the hanga dúchais. Cén tír eile ar dain a bhúnach teanga dit ar fa ceithre bliain a déag, is an sin nach dúr a ceadbit í a leabhart lo. Tá barna huntasach idir mianta an phobal i leithnatanga agus iarracht an stát chóiris féin i leithnatanga. Níl an stát i dul a hasab sa malach ar an astrútanga ó Gaeilge í an béarla. Tá nídig éileh or gearta ar an stát pléiling in ó rauatanga, príomhthanga golóraing agus príomhthanga ifigúil an stát. Tá na seirbhísí seo ar fad tábhachtach, a capar cuiineh gur gádaling iad a úsáid léirú bhfuil gáiló, ach níos tábhachtí is níos bunúsí ná sin, Gaeilge leirs le gacéin uail sí acu, agus imar is tábhachtí ar fad. Nagan si mar phríomhthanga againn féin in our Gaeilge, in our Gadribh, agus in our Gordish, mar gur Gael sin. Deirg an star gur rudí in déanta ach nar darnach. Bechuirling de broadú lastí seo, sa saoil seo is beag is féidir rá gur ling go thomláin é. Is linge an Gaeilge, agus bechuirling í a chuircin cín an nach slí gur féidirling, mar gur Gael sin. Is am cinúnach a taulan is seo heid na Gaeilge sa stát seo. Mor tusa sás de seachas de bhar na bhil, the seirbhísí atá is lite doing a éile go glórach is gníomhú ling. Deirg an star gur rudí in déanta ach nar darnach. Deirg an star gur deisigaing ach nar blacham ar lei. Deirg an star gur teanga áling a bhíoch sa Gaeilge. Céir de deirg tú.
Okay, so that was the kind of call to arms for us to go out, and it's I had a funny moment earlier in my office when I watched this again, and even now it's strange because it's complete propaganda, obviously. The music behind it even is enough to show you that. There's some facts in it that aren't exactly true. But the last line when he says, Derhi an star, history will say, Gertanga alling a viach soege. He uses the past tense, that Irish was a beautiful language. Every time I hear that, I've seen that about 14, 15 times. And every single time I hear it, I get this lump in my throat. Because for us, and this was my point as well in making this language a person today, because if Irish died, for lots of us neo-native speakers who weren't raised with Irish but who learnt it in school and then who decided that we would keep up with it then for the rest of our lives, and who will probably raise our children in Irish if we have children, for us, for that language to die would be like for a member of our family to die. And we feel I don't know what to compare it to in America. Some maybe Irish Americans know that feeling and are sort of supporting the language, but we feel so strongly about it, and it was great to see so many people coming out on the streets for that protest, and we do hope that those kind of protests will change the government's mind in creating more services, because the more services that are provided, the more visible the language becomes and the more accessible it is then for people who learn it. We want, if we raise our children with Irish, that they will be able to speak that language then with the state in which it's the first official language. So there is hope. I can't end on that note. So just a few more things. If anybody knows the app Duolingo, it's a language learning app. It's free. It's great. If you are interested in just hearing even what Irish sounds like a bit more, somehow they've got the Irish language version up before Russian and Turkish and Chinese, which is fantastic. And there's people all over the world learning it through the app Duolingo, so I'd recommend that. There are organisations like Gaelic Yesterday that organise Irish comedy events in the city for young people and for old people. And then we have an Irish language football team, Gaelic, that is getting stronger and stronger every year, that they only speak Irish at training sessions. There are more interest groups like this growing up all over the place. They meet for other reasons, but they speak Irish, and it's the means of communication, which is a positive development in sort of creating a community around the language that's not just based around an interest in the language. And then Villanova. So universities like Villanova that are providing Irish studies courses and teaching the Irish language. When people at home hear, and this is, I'll put these on the spot now, because I've shown, with my class, they make videos and they speak Irish in the videos, and then it's their homework. And sometimes I show their videos to people at home. Don't know if you know that, just to show them what's going on. And one of my friends actually cried when she saw it, because she couldn't believe it, and she loves language so much herself that to know that people abroad are learning the language, that universities like Villanova is making that language available to people in America, means so much to us. And I don't think there's any other language community in the world that would be so happy with you learning their language. So I'll just end on this and say, if you liked Irish from her history, you can find her at this address, and you can befriend her, and you can read through the history again and maybe learn her as well. Thank you.
I think we have, if people have questions, I think we have time. We'll take a couple of questions, and then afterwards you can come up and talk to Eoin. But maybe we have a couple of questions people may have a thought. Christine?
Do you know a lot of writers and poets choosing to write in Irish?
Yeah.
Does it have a strong influence in that country? Or is the influence growing? Could it spread to other countries, say like the United States, do you think?
Well, we do have some fantastic writers, some fantastic poets, but it's much harder. Your audience is much smaller if you're writing in Irish. Some people say Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill is a good example. She's a female poet. She's wonderful, and she refuses to write in English. She only writes in Irish, but she knows the price she pays for that. Her language is really, her audience is very restricted by that fact, but her work has been translated since. And she's written actually a very good article that Joseph showed me about, she's an article, Why I Write in Irish, if you're interested in it, and she calls Irish the corpse that sits up and talks back, because people are saying that Irish is a dead language, but she's saying we still have so much to learn from Irish, and it's still very much alive, even no matter how much they tell us it's dead. And then as for it coming to other countries, do you mean the language itself? Yeah, I mean.
Like the United States, it has a large Irish American
Mm-hmm.
population.
Yeah, so there are lots of Americans learning Irish. So I have 20 students in Villanova. Then there are 9 other people doing my job in other universities across the States. You could guess where they are. They're in all the areas where most of the Irish people settled. There's like Boston, New York, Butte, near Butte in Montana. And they all have a similar number of students. So it's growing and growing and growing in Ireland with the help of Fulbright, the Fulbright programme, and with the help of the universities that provide the Irish Studies programmes. And as well as that, there are organisations like Daltaí na Gaeilge, the Students of Irish, and they organise sort of weekend courses that anybody can go to at any level. And you go and you stay there for a weekend, you do Irish dancing, you do Irish singing, and you learn the Irish language. And it's actually really fun. I went to one and taught it just in February, and it was fantastic. So if anybody's interested in that as well, I could give you more information on that too. Megan.
I was thinking about my own family background and about the fact that we still have German words that my family uses from my mom's side because her parents spoke German in the United States forever.
Mm-hmm.
So like her grandparents only spoke German, they were in German communities, blah, blah, blah. Did the same thing not happen because of what you were saying in Ireland, that you wanted your kids to get ahead so you didn't teach them Irish?
Yeah.
But why, when my father's side of the family showed up and they were all Irish and they only lived with the Irish, why wasn't there sort of an Irish language?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there were some families who came and who kept it, and it depends as well when they came. So more recent immigrants maybe to America possibly kept it better than the ones who came earlier.
Springfield, Mass.
Springfield, Massachusetts.
Yeah. In Springfield, Mass, there's a mini Gael talk there that has been going since 1900. So there's still family after family has sort of continued it, and it ebbs and flows. But other examples might be Nova Scotia.
That's a good example, yeah. So that's Scots Gaelic. It's very similar to Irish up in Nova Scotia in Canada. And so they've kept it alive as a sort of community language there, but it's shrinking all the time. It's hard for minority languages now, especially with English absolutely everywhere. I think it's hard for French, probably even in Canada, to stand against English because of media and because most of what we watch, lots of Irish teenagers have American accents because of their media and because they watch American films, so little small changes happen in the way they speak. But yeah, so I think it's a shame, but I think it's surprising to me for America to be so monolingual almost. I mean, it's sort of English and now Spanish as well. And for all of those languages that came over to have sort of shriveled away, it's such a shame. The German as well. I think it's probably in a similar situation to Irish in that it's not still the community language in very many places, even though there are loads and loads of people who have Irish and German ancestry.
There's also there are maybe more. There's this new. Did I show you this? The Dictionary of Irish Slang in America.
No.
It's
not to be recommended.
Right, terrible. But there are so many suggested loan words, and some of them are indisputable, like shack. But there are so many other words that that people suggest had Irish influence, but we don't even know.
No.
It's sort of undocumented. But when we see Irish immigrants, like the word shack in Irish, it's almost identical. But there are so many other words.
A house.
So.
Yeah, just a house. If everybody know what chalk was.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So what are the numbers now in
Oh,
Ireland?
okay.
First versus second language.
Yeah. So I've avoided that question because nobody knows. In the census in 2011, they asked that question, but the problem is that everybody's self-assessing. So there are people saying, "Oh, I'm fluent," and they can't speak a word. And then there's people who are very shy who say, "Oh, I can't speak that at all," when they would probably be fluent in conversation. They would definitely understand a lot. So it was something like, I think it was like 40,000 people said that they could, but then less said they spoke it on a daily basis. It's hard to tell, and things have changed in recent years as well. So, I mean, my mother's Welsh and my father's Irish. Neither are Irish speakers. My father learnt it in school, like we all do, from 4 years to 18, and then when he went to university as well, and he taught Irish. He raised me in English, along with my mother, and then in school I learnt it as well. And then I studied it in university, and now when I live in Dublin, I live with other Irish speakers. So that's happening more and more, that these independent speakers, we've sort of realised that the state is not going to do it for us, which is a good realisation, because the language can't survive on state handouts or state support. It has to come from communities. And so that's happening more and more, that individual Irish speakers are moving in together and creating their own little Gaeltachts in their house. So we called our house the Gaeltach.
How many would you say, are more bilingual, or people would understand a lot of Irish?
Well, yeah,
it would be larger.
It's much larger. We all have to learn it from 4 years old to 18. You can't sit through 14 years and not know anything when you come out. I mean, it's similar to the situation here in Spanish, where people learn Spanish, they come out and they say they can't understand it, but if they had to read a sign they were in trouble, they probably could. So it's much higher than 40,000, I would say. And we've election coming up in 2016, and depending on which party gets in, one of the parties is Sinn Féin, and that's a whole other topic of conversation. I can give another hour lecture on that, but they're the most favourable party towards Irish at the moment, and they're starting a campaign called Líofa. They've started a few years ago, called Líofa, which is the word for fluent, and they've set a target of something like 20,000 people to become fluent by a certain time, and these people are taking courses. And what's actually nice about the Irish language movement in Northern Ireland is that it's getting some of the Protestant community to re-embrace their Irish language heritage as well, because the Irish language isn't the property of the Catholic nationalists, which it was often seen as. And so it's broadening that out now to more people, because it belonged to the whole island, and Protestants have spoken Irish for many years as well. So that's a positive development there.
I've been to a number of music festivals, and there's a lot more music in Irish. Is that helping? It seems to be a lot of younger people that are performing in Irish.
Yeah. So there's two things. There's traditional Irish music, and lots of traditional Irish music speakers speak Irish as well at those events. Not all of them do, but a good number do. But there's a new sort of trend now in Irish language music, in that they're taking like Avicii songs and sort of, I don't know, Taylor Swift songs, and translating them to Irish. And what's good about that is that it's reaching people who aren't interested in Irish traditional music, but are interested in Taylor Swift, and then they hear it in Irish and they're like, oh, actually it's quite nice in Irish as well, and then they start to become interested again. So those new ventures are very fruitful, because they start to reach people who haven't been reached before. So if anybody's interested in hearing some pop in Irish tonight, you could look up Lurgan, Lurgan, and they translate 6 or 7 songs a year.
Can we give Owen
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
and Mr. Let me Gaelic on work?
No, let ahead.
Ta ceiste go mát fan Brúna Báine.
Brún the Boine. Yes.
Dúi tú sé a dús a leachta. Dúirte go dána na Celtic stá harfa chuig céigid trí céid rib crís.
Sha.
Ach dúirt the Shandali gur tógu in action chuig bhíle bliana hen.
Sha.
So cé híad do what you're a hóga.
Níl Stein.
Not Celtic?
Níha. Is tín tá siad níos sin a fós.
Oh well.
Yeah, agus tháinig na Celtic go dtíon tí agus thóg siad an chuig go. So the question is about Brúna Báine, which is the area around the Boyne River, where Newgrange is. Newgrange is a beautiful, I'll actually show you it here, seeing as I have the internet. It's a very, very, very old stone structure. So Tomas said it's said to be sort of 5,000 years. They can't date it exactly, but 5,000 years maybe before Christ. And as I was saying, we don't really know who these people were. They've left some of their language in place names. So the river Liffey, for example, Liffey is not a native Irish word, and it was probably taken from the people who lived there before. There are a few other river names like that were taken from them, but we don't know where really they came from. We don't know much about them. This is a remarkable place. I'll just talk about it for a second because it's really wonderful. It's thousands of years old. Every single winter solstice, if it's not cloudy, and it's often cloudy, but if it's not cloudy, on the winter solstice every single year, the sun shines down this light box and hits the back passage of the tomb every single year since. And you know, we sort of think of these cavemen who were the Stone Age people like dragging clubs after them, but they were definitely advanced like astronomers and advanced builders, to be able to work that out. It only shines into that passage one day in the year, and it's always on the winter solstice. But it was not the Celts who built this. It existed before the Celts came. But it's interesting because a lot of the decoration on the tomb is sort of swirly things that we now associate with the Celts. So that kind of thing makes it confusing to draw those lines. And I mean, who knows, maybe the Celts came along and did doodles on it afterwards. I don't know. But it's not the Celts who actually built those monuments.
Maybe I could throw in some things here. And Irish does exist in the area, in the Philadelphia area. Owen on Thursday nights has a conversation group here. There are several people teaching Irish, and probably next year we'll have a beginner's Irish course. The conversation course is for someone who has some background right now. But we'll start a beginner's course, and there are courses that are free, there are courses that can cost you something. We have, at the Irish Center, once a month we have a singer session up there, and probably 50% of the songs there are in Irish, and there are several Irish speakers there. There's a luncheon we have every Wednesday at the Immigration Center. And finally, as Eoin has kind of said, people are starting to speak some Irish there who went through the school system in Ireland, and it's coming out a little bit. Thomas is an example right here. He's not from Ireland, he's an American. He learned Irish, and he's probably one of the best speakers I've ever heard.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that happens as well is when people move away from Ireland, when they emigrate, suddenly they realise, ooh, I actually quite liked home and I wish I'd learnt Irish, especially in countries where English is not the main language, because they hear all these other languages and they think, I wish I had my own as well. So that often happens for people who move abroad, and that they sort of get this interest in their heritage as well and start to learn Irish. But just to let you know, in Villanova we have a beginner's class and an intermediate class, and we would love to grow it from year to year. I won't be here next year, but somebody equally attractive and equally intelligent will be here in my place, and it's a fun class, I hope. My students will be able to tell you after. You can ask them instead of me. But I have fun in the class, and I love teaching that class. And everybody's welcome to. Jerry's sitting in on it, the class, not taking exams, but if you want to just sit in and learn and take part in the activities but not do any of the work, that's fine as well. And we'd love to grow it bigger. So if you like the sound of it, try and fit it into your timetable. And if you're doing it and you enjoy it, make sure to tell your friends who are coming next year to Villanova or your other friends on campus.
And June 6th, we will have a one-day immersion program at the Irish Center in Philadelphia.
I'll be teaching that as well.
And a last announcement, and then we're going to give Eoin a big round of applause. On April 14th, Regina
Icholathon
is coming to talk about Irish language media, who was a professor of Eoin's.
Yeah.
So, can we give
She's
Eoin
great.
a giant round of applause?
Thank you.